Hey, Sip and Talkers, welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe, and as always, joined by Sunny.
Hi, Sip and Talkers.
Today, we're digging into a fascinating mix. We've got the intricate dance of global trade tensions, the confusing signals coming from the economy, and of course, the latest twists and turns in the world of Elon Musk. We've pulled together a range of recent reports to help us, navigate it all.
Right.
And as we explore these topics, everything from tariffs to interest rates to groundbreaking tech visions, maybe keep this question in mind. How much predictability can we really expect in the global landscape over the next year or two, given all these competing pressures and, influential players? Okay, let's dive in. Let's start with that ever-complex relationship between the U.S. and China on the trade front. What's the current state of play? It feels like we're getting mixed signals.
Mixed signals is exactly right. On one hand, there's a notable sign of de-escalation. Recent high-level talks between U.S. and Chinese leaders have actually paved the way for renewed trade negotiations. Mm-hmm. The explicit aim here is to try and resolve ongoing disputes over tariffs and also critical supplies like rare earth minerals. So that's potentially a positive step, dialogue anyway.
Okay, talks resuming.
Yeah,
that sounds like a move away from confrontation. But I've definitely seen some pretty fiery rhetoric and calls for, the complete opposite approach. What's driving that sort of hardline view?
You're absolutely right. The hardline camp is still very vocal. Take someone like analyst Kevin O'Leary, for instance. He's called for a massive 400% tariff on China.
Whoa, 400%. That's intense. Isn't that essentially a call for a trade blockade?
It is, yeah, and that's precisely his intention. His view, it seems, stems from this deep-seated skepticism about China's trustworthiness. He points specifically to long-standing concerns about intellectual property theft.
Wow, okay.
As the reason he believes only such drastic measures that would basically cut off trade access, would force China to, quote, play by the rules.
So we have official negotiation pathways opening up, but then countered by these calls for extreme economic pressure and, frankly, skepticism about whether talks will even yield results.
Yeah.
Beyond tariffs, what other tools are being used to discuss on the control side?
Well, the Commerce Secretary is also signaling a push for stricter enforcement of export controls. The specific focus here, according to the reports we've seen, is protecting sensitive U.S. high-tech intellectual property from being acquired by China.
I see.
So while talks are happening, the U.S. is also kind of reinforcing its defensive measures around technology.
It's this constant push and pull, isn't it? A negotiation versus control, dialogue versus extreme tariffs. How do other countries navigate this whole dynamic? Does it benefit or hurt them?
That's a really critical question, and the analyses offer different perspectives on that. Some analysts express concern that if the U.S. and China rush these renewed talks, reach a quick bilateral resolution, allies like South Korea might find themselves getting fewer concessions or benefits than they might have hoped for in a longer, maybe more multilateral negotiation process.
Right, they could get sidelined.
Exactly. However, another view suggests China's current strategic approach in these talks actually benefits ASEAN nations. It allows them to sort of observe the situation from the sidelines without immediately facing significant tariff hikes or direct trade pressures themselves. So, depending on the region and the specific outcome of the talks, the ripple effect can be quite different.
It really just underscores the complex position the current U.S. administration is in, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Trying to balance legislative demands, domestic political pressures, and these major geopolitical challenges all at once. Trade policy is clearly a central piece of that whole puzzle. Okay, shifting gears slightly then. Let's take the economy's pulse more broadly. The markets feel like they're being pulled in multiple directions lately. What's the underlying story there?
Yeah, the market picture is definitely a blend of, let's say, optimism and caution right now. A major factor everyone is watching is the pressure on the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates. They're getting nudges from global moves, like the European Central Bank's recent rate cut, and also, according to some reports, political pressure.
But the Fed seems pretty consistent, saying they'll stick to their data-driven approach. They're not ready to jump just yet, are they?
Precisely. Their public position is quite clear. They need to see further cooling in inflation and solid economic data before they'll consider rate cuts. They've indicated we might see maybe 1 to 2 cuts later this year if the numbers align, but they're waiting for that confirmation, not just acting on external pressure.
It often seems like headlines about trade or politics dominate the news cycle, but what are markets actually focusing on when they're making investment decisions day to day?
Well, the core focus really remains on macroeconomic fundamentals. The labor market, for instance, continues to show stability, with unemployment noted recently at 4.2%. That's still quite steady.
Yeah.
And reports consistently highlight strong earnings from big tech companies. I think NVIDIA and Microsoft is a significant factor boosting investor confidence and propping up valuations, even amid other uncertainties.
So even with those trade tensions we just discussed, is the immediate fear of a, let's say, full-blown trade war receding a bit, maybe thanks to the resumed talks?
For now, yes, it seems that way. The immediate tail risk, that low probability event with a potentially huge negative impact, like a sudden massive trade war that seems to be lessening as negotiations are back on the table.
Okay.
And this relative optimism about trade stability has actually been cited as a key driver behind recent stock market gains. We've seen indices like the MSCI hit new highs, though the S&P 500 is still noted as being about 2% shy of its own record. So progress, but not quite there.
But it's not all sunshine and optimism, is it?
Yeah.
I feel like there's a counter-narrative about U.S. assets specifically. What's that about?
Absolutely, and that's where the caution really comes in. Some investors are reportedly wary of U.S. assets. They're pointing to policy uncertainty or even chaos. That's a direct quote from one report, particularly looking ahead to potential political shifts.
Right, election year uncertainty and all that.
Exactly. There's even discussion of a potential sell America theme where foreign investors might start pulling capital out of U.S. markets. Now, this could potentially lead to declines in the dollar, bonds, and stocks as that money is redirected elsewhere globally. It's a fascinating tension between the strong fundamentals and that perceived policy risk.
Interesting. And what's happening economically on the other side of the Pacific, in China? We touched on trade, but what about their domestic economic policy? Anything significant there?
Yeah, a notable development in China is a significant ramping up of their global income tax enforcement. Reports indicate this isn't just targeting the ultra-wealthy anymore. They seem to be broadening their reach to affect less affluent citizens as well.
Huh. Why the push for stricter tax collection now? What's driving that domestically?
It seems driven by a confluence of factors, really. There's a pressing need for fiscal revenue, especially in a slowing economy. There are ongoing challenges in their property market, which has historically been a big source of local government income. And there's also a stated government push towards achieving greater tax fairness across the population. So it's partly about shoring up government finances and maybe partly about addressing wealth disparity concerns.
Okay, that gives us a pretty solid picture of the present. Let's look ahead a bit, based on these analyses. What do the forecasts suggest about the global economy specifically in 2025?
Well, the projections vary slightly depending on the source, but the general consensus seems to point towards global economic growth, likely landing somewhere between 2.5% and 2.7% for 2025.
Okay, so modest growth.
Modest, exactly. But, and this is a big but, the reports are very clear. Lingering trade tensions and geopolitical risks are consistently highlighted as major headwinds. These could significantly weigh down that growth, potentially pushing it towards the lower end or even below this range if things escalate.
Right. How do the major global economies kind of stack up within those forecasts?
The U.S. economy is generally seen as relatively more resilient compared to others. It's expected to continue benefiting from its stable labor market and consumer spending. But the Eurozone and China are specifically highlighted as facing pressures for slower growth. The Eurozone is noted as being potentially held back by political instability in key member states like Germany and France.
Right.
While China's projected growth around 4.3% in one report is seen as particularly vulnerable to potential U.S. tariff threats impacting its export-heavy sectors.
And what about emerging markets? Are they expected to be a source of strength, or do they face challenges too?
Emerging markets face pretty significant risks in this outlook, actually. Reports point particularly to the challenge posed by a strengthening U.S. dollar.
Oh, yes.
And the potential for capital outflows if global investors become more risk-averse or start shifting funds back to the U.S. This situation could be exacerbated by policy uncertainties, especially for countries carrying high levels of dollar-dominated debt. Brazil was mentioned as a specific concern. We even saw the Brazilian currency, the real, depreciate quite significantly, like 10% late in 2024, despite their central bank already hiking interest rates.
Yeah.
It just shows that vulnerability.
Let's zero in on a specific region then. What's the outlook for Taiwan's economy in 2025, according to these reports? How are things looking there?
Yeah, forecasts for Taiwan's growth in 2025 are slightly split depending on the agency you look at. One puts it around 2.91%, another closer to 3.14%.
Okay, so around 3%.
Right, hovering around that 3% mark, which, sounds okay on the surface, but these projections also signal definite challenges and a fair bit of caution. They particularly suggest growth might be stronger early in the year, but could face headwinds later on.
What are the main pressures Taiwan's economy is expected to face? What are those headwinds?
A key concern that's highlighted is weaker external demand, especially expected in the latter half of the year. Reports note that recent export and import growth rates saw a bit of an uptick, but they anticipate this momentum could slow as the effect of earlier orders fades.
I see.
This potential slowdown in exports could pressure both overall growth and, importantly, business investment. Domestic consumption and investment forecasts have also seen slight downward adjustments in recent reports, suggesting a degree of conservatism from businesses and consumers.
So maybe some hesitation.
Exactly. Likely influenced by broader trade uncertainties, making people perhaps hesitant to spend big or commit to large investments.
And are businesses actually feeling confident about the year ahead? What does the sentiment data show?
Well, the data on business sentiment isn't particularly encouraging, unfortunately. Business climate indices across manufacturing, services, and construction all showed a decline as of March 2025. And looking ahead to the latter half of the year, specific industries show significant pessimism. For example, reports state over 60% of chemical firms are expecting negative conditions.
Wow, that's high.
It is. And electronics firms also show a considerable degree of caution. So this overall dip in business confidence definitely adds to the risk picture for Taiwan's economy.
It's always helpful to compare. How does Taiwan's projected outlook stack up against, say, a regional peer like South Korea?
Interestingly, several international bodies, S&P Global, the IMF, the ADB, they're actually projecting Taiwan's growth rate to be higher than South Korea's for 2025.
Oh, really?
Yeah. South Korea's central bank recently lowered its own forecast pretty significantly, down to 1.5%. And they partly attributed that reduction to political uncertainty stemming from recent events there. So while Taiwan faces its own pressures, its relative position looks slightly better in these specific forecasts.
Okay. Are there any other specific sectors or regions globally highlighted as facing particular risks in the 2025 outlook? Anything else jump out?
Yes, the European auto industry is explicitly mentioned as facing a challenging year in 2025. After seeing very limited growth in 2024, reports indicate it's pressured by increased competition, especially from China, and also faces the potential threat of U.S. tariffs on imported cars.
Right, that could really hit them.
Exactly. Such tariffs could directly limit European car exports to a major market. And another significant global factor woven through many of these reports is the divergence in monetary policy we're seeing worldwide. It's quite striking.
So,
While you have cautious rate cuts being discussed in the U.S., actual cuts happening in the Eurozone, talked of potential rate hikes in Japan, and continued easing policies in China. This lack of synchronized central bank action could increase financial market volatility, making capital flows less predictable and potentially impacting investor confidence globally. It adds another layer of uncertainty.
okay, we absolutely have to talk about Elon Musk. I mean, he seems to be constantly in the headlines, whether it's for his companies, his controversies, or just his public statements. What's the latest from his orbit?
He continues to be a central and, often polarizing figure, driving both aggressive innovation at his companies and quite a bit of controversy in the public arena. One key point from recent reports is his stated commitment to Tesla. He's publicly pledged to remain CEO for at least another 5 years, barring unforeseen circumstances, of course.
And he's been incredibly vocal, maybe even agitated, about his compensation package after that Delaware court ruling, right?
Oh, he hasn't held back at all. He stated very directly that he believes he deserves incredible compensation for what he calls Tesla's incredible achievements. He's expressed significant frustration over that Delaware court decision that rejected his original $56 billion compensation package, and that package is now valued much higher, reportedly around $100 billion, thanks to the company's performance since it was granted. So you can see why he's focused on it.
Right. Beyond the cars, what does he see as absolutely crucial for Tesla's long-term future? What's his big thing?
The Optimus humanoid robot project seems central to his vision. He talks about the potential for it to produce millions, even billions of units in the long run, fundamentally reshaping industries. He really views this as a core pillar of Tesla's future growth, beyond just vehicles.
And protecting that vision seems key.
Absolutely. And to protect this vision and his overall strategic direction for Tesla, he's been very clear about his desire to maintain enough voting control in the company. Basically, to ensure he can't be easily swayed or potentially pushed out by activist investors. Control is definitely a key theme for him.
His political interactions also seem to draw significant attention and, well, sometimes controversy. What's been happening on that front?
They certainly do. Reports suggest his relationship with figures like Donald Trump, which previously involved frequent calls, now appears somewhat strained, and a particularly public and, frankly, acrimonious feud emerged recently with Steve Bannon.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Musk publicly called Bannon a criminal on social media. This conflict reportedly stemmed from Bannon and Peter Navarro suggesting investigations into various aspects of Musk's life, his immigration status, his security clearance, even his drug use. And they went so far as to float the idea of nationalizing SpaceX and Starlink via the Defense Production Act.
Wow, nationalizing SpaceX. Those are some serious suggestions.
Very serious. And it seems like these political comments have had tangible consequences, even for Tesla's stock value.
How so?
Yes. Reports linked a recent significant hit to Tesla's stock market value, reportedly $153 billion at one point, in part to the uncertainty and potential backlash generated by Musk's political statements. Adding to the company's specific challenges was the recent resignation of the lead for that crucial Optimus robot project. That didn't help sentiment.
Right.
But despite these bumps and controversies, analyses from firms like ARK Invest, for example, remain bullish on Tesla's underlying business fundamentals. They specifically noted their positive outlook, even without relying on potential government subsidies for electric vehicles or other areas. So they're betting on the core tech and vision.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And how does he view his own interactions with the government, especially given SpaceX's massive federal contracts? Does he see a conflict?
Musk has consistently insisted there's no conflict of interest in his occasional advisory role to the government. He frames the billions SpaceX receives in federal contracts as simply being business deals earned based on performance and capability.
Just business, okay.
Right, arguing it's not evidence of undue influence. He's also publicly defended private business dealings, like those of the Trump Organization, suggesting they face unfair scrutiny from the media. It's clear that Musk's intense drive for efficiency and innovation is a powerful force behind his companies. There's no denying that. But his public persona and his entanglement in the political world definitely make him a polarizing and, frankly, unpredictable figure who continues to make significant waves across technology, business, and politics.
Wow, okay. We've really covered a lot of ground today. From the delicate balance of U.S.-China trade talks versus those hardline calls, to navigating the mixed signals in the current economy and looking ahead at the sometimes fragile outlook for 2025 globally and in regions like Taiwan, plus the latest chapter in the always evolving Elon Musk story. It's a lot to process.
Yeah, we've aimed to pull out the core insights from these different reports and analyses for you, showing you not just what is happening, but trying to get at some of the underlying reasons, the different perspectives being debated, and the potential implications as these forces play out.
It's certainly a complex web of interconnected events and data points. Hopefully this deep dive gives you a clearer picture of some of the major forces at play right now and heading into next year.
As always, we encourage you to take this information, think critically about it, maybe dig a little deeper into the areas that particularly pique your interest, and consider how these global shifts might impact you or the areas you care most about.
And maybe circling back to our initial question, given the competing pressures for negotiation and protectionism in trade, the mixed and uncertain economic signals we're seeing globally, and the significant influence of powerful, often controversial figures like Musk operating across business, technology, and politics, how much predictability can we really expect in the global economic and technological landscape over the next year or two?
It definitely raises a fundamental question about navigating persistent uncertainty in both markets and policy environments. Something to really think about. Look, we love getting into the weeds on this stuff, but we also like to keep it real and hopefully enjoyable for you. So if you're digging these deep dives and want more of our slightly less formal takes, be sure to hit subscribe for Sip and Talk right here on your podcast app.
And hey, since we're all about sharing the love, you should also definitely go check out our friend Mickey's YouTube channel. Seriously entertaining stuff happening over there.
Yeah, Mickey's great. You won't regret it.